Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, just based on where you're logging in from. We're just waiting for a few more people to join in, and Joseph and I were just having some casual conversation before we start. But welcome. But as we wait for folks to come in, I'd love to get to know everybody. I can see a list of folks, but I'd love to know where you're coming in from and where you're joining us. Where you're working, perhaps, and the name in the comment section would be really useful, just to get to know everybody. We'll start in just a few moments, just as we wait for folks to join us. Hi, Kalyan. Hi, Jane. For folks that are just joining in, welcome to our discussion today. We're just waiting for folks to join in. We're just introducing ourselves on chat right now. You can just drop in a name and where you're joining us from today before we get started. Awesome. Yeah, we could probably get started. Welcome again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on where you're joining in from. My name is Jinu. I work on the product team at Alumni. I have a very interesting topic for us today. We're going to be talking about the state of alumni engagement data in 2023, and I am thrilled to introduce our host, Joseph Volin, and I'll hand it over to him to introduce himself. But Joseph has had a very colorful career spanning over 10 years in alumni engagement and in data. He's currently the Senior Director of Constituent Engagement at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Joseph, I know you've had a very long span in career and gone through a lot of different variations of data and alumni engagement. I'm curious to learn how you got here, what your current role is, and some of top of mind issues for you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. So my history in higher education tracked back to obviously being an engaged undergraduate student. After graduating from Lewis University, I started my master's, including my master's at Northern Illinois University, where I worked in the Division of Student Affairs, working on assessment, working with a lot of data, working on strategic planning for the division for, at that time, 23 departments. And then when I finished my master's, I started working in student affairs, much like many people in advancement. I worked in residence life for about a year and saw an opportunity to return to my alma mater, which is, again, not unlike what many people in advancement, the path that they have taken to come back to work in alumni relations. And so I took that opportunity, moved back to the Chicagoland area where I currently live with my wife and my kids, and had a great career at Lewis for over 4 years. But while I was at Lewis is really where my enjoyment of working with data and the experience started. I was working on a team of two in alumni relations, focused on alumni relations. It was the first time that the university had a dedicated team for those purposes. Prior to that, it was events and alumni relations and annual giving and parent programs, etc. And so my supervisor at the time and I were the first two individuals focused on this one area. And we had a vice president who encouraged us and accepted the fact that we wanted to start to measure engagement and really look at how we did that and how we could do that at the university. And so we started looking for vendors and we started putting calls out. This was, this more than a decade ago at this point. And we were running into issues and concerns working with vendors at the time that tried to get us to fall into what they were already tracking. And so a common conversation would be that, oh, we want to track A, B, and C. And the vendor would come back and say, well, you really don't need to look at this. You should look at that instead. And, after having a couple of these conversations at the time, I had already started working in my doctorate. I was taking a statistics class, and I remember having a conversation with my supervisor to say, I think I can figure this out. I think we can do this. And so that's exactly what we did. It took us probably 6 months from beginning to end to develop a scoring system. We since published it in the Cape Turns magazine. I finished my doctorate, and I see it's Jane Zimmy on the call. Jane, I you don't know me. I don't know you, but I saw that you're from Mount Holyoke in the chat, and the one of the largest reasons why I'm able to still explore the use of data uh, after having completed my doctorate was because of my dissertation advisor, Carrie Cordigast, who was not an alumni engagement professional, was not an advancement professional. She's a faculty member at Northern, but she was a volunteer on her reunion committee at Mount Holyoke. And so when Carrie and I would have this conversation, Dr. Cordigas and I would have the conversation about engagement data, about engagement, how we track it, and what that looked like. Because she was a volunteer, she understood. And fast forward now, 8+ years later, I've been at Illinois Tech for 7 years. Started with the law school, and early 2020, I moved into this central office to work with a fantastic team of individuals focused on alumni engagement, annual giving for the entire university.
Wow, that is. We've already had a chance to cover some of this, and it's been very interesting to follow your journey. And I have a lot of questions to go over, so I'll pause on that. But before we start, just a few like housekeeping points to keep in mind. By default, everyone's on mute. So if you're applauding for Joseph, you may not hear you. So yeah, you're going to be on mute and the cameras are going to be turned off. But feel free to use the chat to drop in a question, engage with somebody else who is also attending, or any ideas that come up as we speak as well. So yeah, the chat is available. Everything that we discuss here, the recording and some resources we will be sharing within the day. So you can expect that in your inbox as well. There will be a few polls through just to sort of get a sense of where all of us are in our data journey. So I encourage you to participate in that as well. And like I mentioned a little earlier, feel free to post your questions in the chat. So we'll jump into the first poll that we have. The question is fairly simple, is how would you describe the use of data at your organization today? So you will see a poll that comes up. You should see it shortly. It has about like 7 or 8 options, right? Ranging from like we've not really dealt with data all the way to we're completely data driven. So feel free to choose something that's more appropriate for your organization, and we'll see how we all stand. Oh, wow. Yeah, we'll just wait a few more seconds for everyone to chime in. Perfect. So we're about a minute in. I am just about to close the poll, and you should see the results come up on your screens as well. It's very interesting to see the data, but it's something that people who work in data, and Joseph, I'm guessing you would have predicted this also in some sense coming into today. But yeah, it looks like there is a lot of folks that are earlier on in their journey. So where the data is, we need to find the data. We have to figure out how to analyze the data. And also communicate what we're learning from this data effectively. So yeah, Joseph, I'm sure you'll have a lot of things to share. But yeah, if anyone was interested in the poll, this is from a book that's called Scope. This is a common at case conferences. It's written by Kevin McDonald and Peter B. Wiley. It goes a lot into data-driven advancement, and this was a good measure of where we stand today. Yeah, so I'd like to start here, Joseph. So tell me a little bit about the team and the technology that you use at the Illinois Institute of Technology. What are the data points that you look at? What is that experience like, the challenges that you have today?
Yeah, so we are a Blackbaud school. We use Razor's Edge. We moved in March of 2020, a great time to migrate your database. We had been on Razor's Edge 7.9.2 or whatever it was at that time, and we migrated over to NXT, to the cloud version, as we were learning to work remote, our entire team. And so I'm a part of a wonderful team. Like I said, our entire advancement team at full staffing with open positions right now is probably close to 60, 58 to 60. I have the pleasure of working with a really solid group of individuals on our constituent engagement team. I report up to an associate vice president who has 3 reports, myself, someone who works on external relations in our College of Architecture, and then someone who works with our advisory boards. And then I have a team that reports up through me that is focused on alumni relations and annual giving, regional programs, Giving Day, which is next Thursday for us, homecoming, awards and recognition, nominations for our alumni board, and some other partnerships across campus. As far as technology that we're using, like I said, we're an NXT school. We do what we can. You know, one of the things that I want to convey in this webinar is that it is very easy to get bogged down. It's very easy to not really lose focus, but have other things that have to take a bigger priority. What's important is that you're tracking what you can. One of the biggest considerations that my former supervisor, a decade ago, and I had when we were developing a specific scoring system, and I would not necessarily advocate for a scoring system if you don't have the resources, because it is something that you need to dedicate time and intensive resources to, most of the time, is that you track what you can, utilizing the resources you have. And so if you're on a platform that doesn't track event attendance and you have to do it another way, you do what you can. If you're utilizing a different communications server or vendor, that's what you have to do. It's important though to take that step back, understand where your data lives, how that data can be helpful to you in your role, your institution, and how can that be meaningful for you throughout all of your work. I had a great supervisor when I was in graduate school working on assessment, working with strategic planning, who said that all data needs to be 3 things. It needs to be measurable. And so you have to be able to, if you're looking at it, you should be able to quantify or qualify it in a way that gives you the opportunity to measure growth, measure progress, and success. It needs to be manageable. And so, it shouldn't need a whole team to do one thing, or it's okay to be able to say that this is a piece of what I do, this is a piece of the responsibilities, but it needs to be measurable, manageable, and meaningful. So as far as meaningfulness, you need to be able to utilize what you're tracking. And so when we were going through this whole system years ago, it was important to us that we be able to do this. we be able to manage the system. This slide right here is an easy indication of what many people track. It's in line with cases, engagement metrics. So when you think about the experiential, the philanthropic, the communications, and I'm missing the fourth bucket. But what you're really looking at is what are those behaviors that you can track? What are the behaviors that you can utilize to segment, to inform your decisions? I saw a lot of individuals on the poll who said that they use the insights, but it's not a regular practice, and that's okay. But you'll notice on this slide, it's the ability to communicate. It's having a valid address. It's having valid contact information. Because if you're operating from a zero-sum game, if you're starting from a point of not having any contact information, it's going to make it harder for you to reach that.
That makes sense. And you had mentioned reunion events and your experience as in the alumni relations department, right? And reunion events. Can you like just draw a correlation or like your experience, has it led you to believe strong correlations between attendance and giving or volunteering and giving? If someone had to start from scratch, what are some like key events that they should start looking at?
If you were talking about just events, I would look at what is simple for your team or resources. Is it a virtual event where you have a faculty member talking about research that individual's doing, that they are currently doing? Is it a virtual fireside chat? Is it in person where you're bringing alumni back to the classroom? Is it reunions for student organizations or for Greek life or for athletics? Is it something that the university is already doing that you can just invite alumni to? You're providing a value add by introducing alumni to that experience, but also introducing those students to that alumni experience so that they can start to understand this is what I do and this is the next step.
Correct. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and we've chatted about this in the past. Just storytelling with data just plays a lot in getting buy-in from the rest of your team and also driving data-driven decisions. And like you shared a few key points, I'd love to dive in. This is where you were sharing the relations that you had with monetary engagement just based off student involvement. I'll let you dive in. I'm sorry.
So yes, this was a very deep dive. This was from my dissertation. I bring this up to show that utilizing data, tracking engagement, and looking at the results and analysis is very much a spectrum, and it's a very wide spectrum. Within this chart, it show the highlighted areas were the areas from my research that were significant. Graduation recency being one of them that, every year that someone gets further away from their graduation, it becomes harder to engage them. So this chart specifically looks at monetary engagement. So it looks at academic programs, shows that those in the social sciences and humanities were more likely to give at this institution that I studied. Was not an institution that I worked at the time. Individuals identifying as female were more likely to give philanthropically, monetarily. And then the fact that the further someone lived away from campus made them less likely to give. And so I don't want anyone to get bogged down. This is not something I do regularly. This is not something you need to do regularly. It's the opposite side of that spectrum to show how in-depth this analysis can get, but you certainly don't need that to tell that story with your data.
That's interesting. And like the parameters that you had on top, B, P, and odds ratio seemed very interesting. And if I were to read this correctly, what this chart tells me is that the higher the odds ratio, the stronger the relation between, like, let's say, student involvement and giving. Is that accurate?
It is, yes. So the higher the odds ratio for distance from campus, that higher the odds ratio correlates to the closer to campus. And for graduation recency, it was closer to graduation. For the student involvement area, it was the quantity of involvement points as an undergraduate student. That's an entirely different conversation of tracking a lot of student involvement that I cannot begin to tackle because it really relies across on campus partners that are often just as stretched as we in advancement.
Right. Yeah. And you shared another table with us a little earlier as well, just overall engagement and its relation to giving. What can we learn from this?
Yeah, so this is more of a manageable way to look at your engagement data. So this is overall engagement. This was years ago when I was doing a study, working on we were getting toward the end of our fiscal year, and we wanted to look at the top percentage of our alumni. The caveat to this is it is at a time, it's not an institution that I'm at currently. We had the scoring system in place, and so that's where you see the top percentages is based on that score. You could think of that to narrow it down as if you're utilizing the case metric, the top 5% and the top 1% are likely the individuals who have opened your emails, have attended an event, and have volunteered. And so they're really checking boxes from various types of behaviors that demonstrate that engagement and that affinity outside of giving. And so what we did with this is that we looked at the top percentages again and who gave, whether they gave in a fiscal year or not. And so you'll see the top 1%. Obviously, everyone had given, the participation was 100%. You narrow it, you go a little bit further down, and you see that of the 57 individuals who were ranked in the top 5% for engagement. And so, again, thinking of that as individuals who have had more than one behavioral engagement with the institution, 56 out of 57 of them gave. And so, as a professional, when I'm looking at end of fiscal year, end of calendar year, this is a really easy way to look at who do I need to solicit? Where is my low hanging fruit? How can I utilize this data to increase my annual giving dollars or my annual giving donors? Even in light of the fact that US News has moved away from tracking that, how do we recognizing that the further from graduation someone gets without engaging makes it more difficult to start engaging them, to move them in that life cycle from unengaged recent alumnus or alumna to engaged non-donor to engaged donor and keeping them in that life cycle until it's necessary or meaningful to pass or appropriate to pass them off to a major gift prospect, move them along in that pipeline to deliver on greater philanthropic priorities. And you can go to the next one. This one is only based on event attendance. And so for those who don't have, it's not easy to pull who opened and clicked emails. If you're not set up currently to easily track who your volunteers are, and maybe you're tracking it in one way or another, if you're tracking events, this can be meaningful for you. This will provide you a measurable value, and it can move the dial for you in creating the cultural philanthropy right where you, right at this time.
Interesting. Just looking at these two charts, like how would you read, like, is event attendance a large indicator of giving participation, or are there other events that you were tracking or activities that you were tracking that had large contributions like this as well?
I would say it's a pipeline. It's really easy for me to say that volunteers would be the highest indicator or the highest correlation or causation into giving. And I know that Kellyanne and I have had a conversation about whether or not you really need to consider that if you're showing that a certain behavior will generally engage more in a certain way. Is that enough? But, you know, people don't generally start out as a volunteer. They may not start out as an event attendee. You know, how did they hear about that event attendance? they got an email from you. They engaged with you on social media. They got a phone call from your calling center, from your engagement center, from a student inviting them to their reunion, inviting them to write postcards or write letters to admitted students. And so I would look at it, before I look at it as which of these is the highest indicator or predictor of whether or not someone will give, I would really consider this as a pipeline and how you engage individuals and recognize that you are going to need to meet everybody where they're at. If you communicate events, some people don't have the time to come to events. They might not live in your backyard. They might have work meetings the evening you have something virtually, or they might just be at a certain point with their family. They're starting families, they're getting new positions. And so, one of the things that I'm most excited about with US News dropping their rankings consideration for alumni participation, one, because I work at a tech school and a healthy number of our alumni are graduate students, which wouldn't factor in. And a lot of the research that I've seen shows that graduate students are more philanthropic. Uh, and it's believed that it's because they are preparing you for your career. Now, the same is said for business majors, for education majors, and for certain humanities and social sciences where an advanced degree might not be necessary. But when you're talking about a tech school and you're talking about engineers or computer scientists who are aptly prepared to enter the workforce and may never need an advanced degree, they're going to feel a sense of loyalty to their alma mater. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about is we can now not have to rely on that pressure to really consider how are we engaging holistically with our constituents, with our base. How are we providing value to the alumnus, to the alumna, to our graduates that can provide value for them and then provide value to our current students?
Um, yeah, and the next thing that I just wanted to touch upon was what are the experiments top of mind for you right now? And even for folks who are just getting started, what are the small, simple thing that they could do today with the data they have just to start seeing data?
Yeah, so I'll take this into two different points. The first is sort of what's top of mind for me. And our team has grown significantly over the last even 2 years. I believe in March, and this is our entire advancement team, we're in a campaign. We're in a $1 billion campaign. It's the Power the Difference campaign, our campaign for Illinois Tech to raise $1 billion. Historically, our university started with $1 million sermon, where Reverend Frank Wakely Gonzalez stood before his congregation and said, if I had $1 million, I could change the way that we educated the sons and the daughters of the meatpacking on the south side of Chicago, the blue collar workers. And so last September, the chairman of our board and our president stood before all of our loyal donors, our board members, from our trustees to our advisory boards, and delivered our $1 billion to say that if we had $1 billion. And so we have grown significantly for this campaign. We're changing the way we're doing things. We are being called on to innovate exceptionally. And so one of the biggest things that we've done over the last 12 months is start utilizing Alumni. And so one of the things that we've started looking at here is how do we use this as a resource to change the way we practice? And so getting certain consent for communication, getting certain interest for volunteers. And how do we track these data points that live in Alumni to our advantage to segment? And so that's sort of the conversation that we're having now. And then, top of mind for me personally with our team is the role that annual giving will play in our campaign. And so certainly the use of data, the consideration that we need to track more, that we need to be better at tracking and more accurate, will give us the ability to really grow when we talk about leadership annual giving. Uh, developing great portfolios for our relationship managers who work on major gifts and principal gifts and leadership level gifts. And the second is sort of what someone can do now. And I would say, spend a little bit of time in a day to get lost in your database. Look at who you believe are your most loyal donors. Look at the people who you believe are your most loyal volunteers. What are they doing? What are the behaviors that individual or those individuals are exhibiting? And how can you pull that information, whether it be individually or aggregately from your database, to utilize it to segment? Because that's going to give you sort of the quickest bang for your buck, is to really develop a profile of who your engaged constituents are. And that's the easiest way that I can think to do it. If you're operating from a point of, where do I start?
Yeah, that's useful. And another question just popped to my mind. 2023 has been the year of AI. There's so many things in the realm of artificial intelligence that's going on. What's your take on it? What is the role it plays in advancement data analytics? Yeah.
I think that we have to accept it. We have to acknowledge it. It is easy to get, myself included, anxious over it and worrisome over, how do we manage this? AI is changing the way people do business in many fields. I have, family members who work in artificial intelligence, with different softwares. And there are a lot of great vendors in the advancement space, from the way in which Alumni can engage your alumni and connect alumni. One of the great ones in the annual giving space is Dataro. Tim has a great product for individuals looking to utilize AI. I would say easily, not having to worry about committing a lot of your resources for implementation, because of the way that it can pivot or position you. And so I think we have to acknowledge it. If you're worried about it, if you're not sure how to use it, it's okay to not utilize it right now. There is still, we had a great conversation about storytelling. Storytelling happens individual to individual or individual to groups. And so, we have long understood that advancement is part science, part art. Yes, we might be skewing more to that science, utilizing AI, utilizing various resources that can automate activities for us. But if we don't recognize that donors are still individuals, that our constituents are still people looking to have conversations, looking to engage with a person, we can't get lost with that. And so I think it's important that we as professionals really balance what that looks like and recognize that we can't just go swing all the way to the other side of the spectrum in utilizing it. We have to be able to meet in the middle, because that's where our constituents are really going to expect us to be.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for that, Joe. And I know there are a few questions. And just a reminder, if there's anything that we can discuss now additionally, or any questions on top of mind, just drop it in the chat and we'll try and go to them right away. And just as we wind down, Joe, you're available on LinkedIn. You have a lot of resources that's available on LinkedIn on what IIT is doing and some of your dissertation as well. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to go through that. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Some of the links are there. And just a reminder, we'll send all this out to you as well. There is an ebook that's available. We worked on it alongside Blackboard. It covers a lot of the metrics that matter and Alumni specifically how it helps. If you would like a copy of the ebook, just drop the word engagement in the chat and we'll make sure to send it out to you. But yeah, that's all that we had to discuss today. Please do share any questions that you have in the chat. and we'll be on for a few more minutes just going over questions. But it was lovely to see you all. Thank you so much, Joe, again, for your time. It was just thrilling for me to have this conversation. Yeah, good evening, everybody.
Of course, thanks. And feel free, everyone, to reach out with any questions or if you want to continue the conversation.